Hi everyone, good afternoon.
Do we need to sit down or
Yeah,
stand?
Sitting down is probably better.
Okay.
It's an hour, right? I'm tired.
So before I ask sharp questions or of the audience, I did some background research and you're a shokunin.
Shokunin.
Yeah,
Shokunin.
yeah. That means to the audience somebody who does things with their hands.
It's like craftsperson. So it's a Japanese term. It's like craftsperson. One of my favorite documentaries is like 𝘗𝘪𝘠𝘵, right? Like somebody who just spends a lot of time as a craftsperson perfecting their craft, right? Perfecting their art. And I actually think the best entrepreneurs, the best investors are actually, I think, shokunin in general. So
and to that effect, I brought you a little gift.
oh, thank you. I don't know what this is, but thank you.
Can somebody in the audience enlighten him?
Number 8 piece of wire.
That's a number 8 wire.
Oh.
So Kiwis apparently can do anything with a number 8 wire.
Oh.
They can fix every problem themselves. Sadly, that means they're not really open to subcontracting and outsourcing and collaborating because they think they can do everything themselves.
Was it a what?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Or a carrot?
Well,
Whatever.
okay. You're also a sunduku.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But let's say that's people who've got books more than they can read.
Yeah, that's definitely a situation. I have like close to like 8,000 books. It's always been a problem.
So I've got a little book for you, Bootstrapping.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm a fan. Bootstrapping is actually underrated. Underrated. I talk a lot. I've been very public about it. I actually think that for a lot of startups, early days, it's better to actually bootstrap than to raise money for VCs.
So that's a co-founder of a New Zealand company with in excess of 10 million annual recurring revenue.
I would like new books.
Bootstrap.
Thank you. This
There
has
we are.
been a profitable day already. Thank you. Thanks.
So, 2.5 years at Yahoo.
Mhm.
Sounds very corporate.
Mhm.
And then you're now much more in the startup world. What did you have to unlearn and what did you have to learn?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give folks a little bit of the backstory, right? So I born in the U.S., raised in Canada. So I grew up in Vancouver, lived there for about 21 years. Lived in Europe and Asia for a couple of years, just goofing around. And then I moved to Silicon Valley in January of '99 for the .com bubble. And so actually, and I've also been public about this, my first job, I actually wanted to be a PR person. So I joined Portland Valley's like third biggest PR firm. I lasted literally 3 months. I was so bad at my job, they fired me on my birthday, right? So anyways, and then after that, I actually lucked out and I ended up applying for this startup. I saw like I like books and I was interested in e-commerce at the time. And this company literally just raised like $15 million to send this application. And they asked me to come in, literally hired me the next day. And so I ran marketing for them. I was early employee, like employee number 14, 15, something like that. And I watched this company after we raised another $15 million on top of that, go to about 150 people. And then of course the bubble kind of burst and it kind of went down the other way. And so I ended up spending 2 years there. .com bubble ended and I was out of work for about 5.5 months. So like people talk about like recessions and things. I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to sort of be in a place where there's just wide decimation of like all the companies were dead. And so in 2001, 5.5 months in, down to my last $500 in my bank account in a very expensive city, I almost had to move back home. I get this phone call from my friend who's just like, hey, my wife is hiring, you should come check this thing out. And there were literally 4 companies hiring in Silicon Valley in 2001. It was Microsoft, eBay, Google, and Yahoo. And so of course I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll take that job, right? And I did everything and original plan was to go and do that for 6 months and go do business school. Ended up staying there for 10.5 years and rose through the ranks. In my last job there, I was a commercial director for the MEA region. So I ran everything in Europe, Middle East, Africa, except for UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. Very fortunate to have done well there. So I actually took 2 years off. That's where I started unlearning all my corporate stuff, doing angel investing. I was actually a very poor angel investor, to be honest. Did 8 deals and they were all stinkers.
So you're a good one now?
Hmm?
You're a good one now?
I think you become good by losing. If you lose your own money, you learn a lot of things. And like I joke, but don't joke about it. Actually would have been better to go and take that money and actually put it in a bathtub and actually light it on fire, because at least some of it would have come back from the backdraft, because I didn't get anything back. Like it was just a total loss. But having said that, was incredibly helpful actually, especially when I got this, I got invited to, I was a mentor at this startup accelerator VC fund called 500 Startups. During those 2 years, I just literally just goofed around and spent a lot of time with them, got to know them very, very well. They asked me to join and start the San Francisco office, so I've been investing now for the last 5.5 years. And those lessons in losing my own money was actually incredibly helpful in how I look at companies, how I look at markets, how I look at stuff in general. So you actually have to lose money. Like the worst thing that can actually happen to you as an investor, whether you're a public markets investor, real estate investor, startup investor, is to do well your first couple of deals because you think you know everything. That's a curse. You end up losing a lot more later on. I see that a lot. So anyways, that's sort of the backstory.
I was kind of jokingly posting earlier today 500 questions for you.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll be able to do that.
We have all afternoon, so my time is your time.
Cool. How many angel groups do we have in the US, do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the number was like 200 or 250 or something.
So the American Capital Association, which is kind of the equivalent of the New Zealand Angel Association, they reckon there's about 240. And average membership is about 55 angels per group. But if you just look at angel groups per capita, you've got about 1 angel group per 1.5 million. In New Zealand, that looks a little bit different. I'm not going to ask you to kind of guess. Yeah. We've got about 15 groups for 4.8 million. That's about 1 angel group per 300,000.
Which seems kind of shocking to me, actually. I'm very surprised by that.
So it's five times the concentration of angel groups. Okay, and then we have
I don't think 5 times more effective, though.
You're in New Zealand.
Yeah, I don't think. If I'm very, very honest, I don't rate the angel groups in the US very well. I think they're all awful. And I like just, so there's a couple of things. I think there's a business model issue with it. Like, so for example, one of the most famous ones, like Keiretsu Forum, right? And they, it's a joke. I think they're predatory to startup founders. And so, like, for example, you have to pay to pitch. I think it's a horrible thing. And so we look down on them. They're scum. It's like they're below whale crap at the bottom of the ocean.
So what would you say if I said that angel groups in New Zealand usually charge 6% commission on investment?
I think it's a problem. Honestly, I think it's a business model and it's an alignment issue. So just it's surprised by that. Maybe not.
Okay. Nothing I want to say, really. Okay.
I'm very direct, and I'm not here to make friends. My take is that it's better to harsh truth than a kind lie.
Yeah. So accelerators. I mean, you run accelerator programs.
Yeah, considered probably one of the best ones, right?
Of course.
No, it's just the truth, right?
I think it was interesting that you ended up with $500 left, and you ended up.
Yeah, I know. It's a
cunning number, isn't it?
It's very, very ironic.
Yeah. Were you going to stop once you have the 500 startups or not?
I mean, you mean me personally?
No, just the whole enterprise.
I mean, we're at 2,300 companies now, so we surpassed that number.
You stick with the brand, right?
Yes, stick with the brand.
You know a lot about branding, right?
Yeah.
So how many applicants do you have typically for a cohort?
So my last cohort, I ended up with 35 companies, and we looked at, I think the number was like 2,400 to 2,500 applications.
And those applications are all from California?
No, everywhere.
Like worldwide?
Yeah, worldwide. Yeah, so probably 50% US, 50% globally.
New Zealand has a lot of accelerators. We've got probably about 5-10 per annum. Would you be surprised if I tell you that probably each one of them hasn't got more than 100 applicants?
Yeah,
from New Zealand only, of course.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. It's a relatively small market, right? Like, you think about how many folks are in California. It's like 40 million people in California alone, right? So you think about that. And also, as an ecosystem, like, I think it's very unfair to compare different ecosystems, right? People are like, oh, we're so far behind. I'm like, Silicon Valley's actually been around for like 60 years, right? So it's had a long, lots of success that's built on top of that's built on top, right? We have had accelerators in the Valley like since the beginning, like 95, Y Combinator, right? So there's a pool, Techstars came like 3-4 years after that. So there's actually a deep pool of actually expertise. And so the reality is that the tech ecosystem in New Zealand is actually very early, right? Like I would liken it as an emerging market from a tech perspective. And so I don't think it's a fair apples to apples comparison, in my opinion. But I'm not surprised by that. And I think, unfortunately, with a lot of accelerator programs, like, I don't know, like there's an argument where it's like, there's too many accelerator programs. I do believe that. I do think there's too many crap accelerator programs. But you could also argue, like, are there too many business schools? I mean, I would also argue there are too many business schools and not needed, right? But I actually think it's the quality of the programs that actually matter.
And you also invest afterwards. You've got a fund. How many companies? You said, I think earlier, 2,300 companies you've invested?
Yeah, so the way that we work, we ultimate VC funded, we invest in 2 different ways, right? We invest either through an accelerator program where we're a lot more hands-on, it's an application process and we spend 4 months with them, very, very hands-on, or where it's like, I just need your money and a little bit of advice every once in a while, I know what I'm doing. These are usually sort of like second-time founders, like, oh, here's like 150K, go do whatever valuation, right? And so those are kind of the 2 different ways we invest.
You just said whatever valuation, you're not too concerned about valuation?
I mean, yeah, generally, like it has to be within market range, right? So obviously not too low because you don't want to screw them on the cap table, but not too high where it's like, because we just see so many companies, so I should have, in theory, a general sense of what is market standard. And so, for example, like if I see a company and it's like, wow, like you want to be valued at 20 mil cap, but where you're at might not make sense. You're probably more like 8 or 9. It's about trying to go for what is reasonable for both sides and what is market standard. And so I'm going to use that term a lot, is what is market standard.
Fair enough. Yeah. So for your fund, is that a 220 model?
Yeah, actually 1.5, 20. Right, so
1.5.
it's 1.5 management fees and 20% if we deliver, right? And so we have hurdles where we have to return the capital at minimum. Like we only get care if we return at minimum 2x. We get a kicker if we return 3x. But we have to return, we always have to return the capital plus pay back the management fees, and then we start getting carry on top of whatever comes after that. Which is standard VC model, right?
When you say standard, like standard around the world, or?
Generally speaking, right?
Because you also do this overseas, not just in the US, right? You're across different countries.
Yeah, so we're across different countries. So I represent the main fund which invests globally, and we do have micro funds in other countries that are run by different partners that focus on the geographic.
And they have a similar structure, similar model.
Yes, similar structure.
Okay. So in New Zealand, we have some funds that are associated with angel groups, and they have a 220 plus 4 model.
Well, I wish we could get that, but it's I mean that day, right? It's about competition, right? And so like it is about competition. And so
we talked earlier, you know what the plus 4 is, but you didn't have a clue.
I had no idea. Yeah, that's
right.
Strange to me. Also.
So for people in the audience, the plus 4, that's another 4% charge to the startup for the investment money. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have standard rates as across the world, and on top of that, every investment into the startup gets a 4% commission.
Yeah. So
You'd love that, wouldn't you?
No, yeah, but it's not. I mean, we do something a little bit different, right? So I'll explain what we do. With Accelerator, like I have 15 full-time, part-time people, right? So what we do is we invest, through the Accelerator, we invest 150,000. We withhold 37.5K of program fees, but we don't make money. We still take a loss on running Accelerator, but I hire a lot of like ex-founders. I hire a lot of like, I pay other outside speakers from like Hollywood to talk about storytelling, theater people. Like it's to cover the costs. And I hire a lot of like chief revenue officers and head of marketing people to sort of work with the companies. So I actually have a staff, right? And so all those things go to cover that. That's Accelerator specific. Yeah, but this seems kind of nuts.
Yeah. Nuts, right. Okay. WeWork, is that gonna work?
No, I'm skeptical. I'm a huge skeptic. I mean, the fact that the founders like taken out $700 million in secondaries from this, Any investor who actually puts money into this, like as a public investor, you deserve to lose your money. You deserve everything that you are getting. I'm very libertarian and very sort of market oriented. The market educates, and I'm just saying, if you didn't even go and take the time to go and read the S1s, right, and just like really go do your due diligence, you deserve to lose your money.
Yeah, due diligence is really important, isn't it?
Do your due diligence.
Yeah, so you are also co-presenting with Sam from Melodics.
Yep. We're investors in them, so they went through my accelerator program 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, actually.
So what do you like about them? What do you think are the challenges for them?
I'm a big fan of Sam, and I'm a big fan of that company. I was on the fence when my team brought them over to me, so I run the investment team over there, and I'm like, you know, the music space, but actually getting to know Sam, like very, very thoughtful, knows the space really, really well. It is a huge space in general, and they're growing like a weed. Like they took everything that we threw at them and really adapted it for their own purposes. Has grit, has hustle. Their growth has been fantastic. So something's working. I think the biggest challenge that they have right now is sorting out a lot of the churn issues, because I think that they were targeting the wrong people. And that's fixable, and he knows that. So I'm very excited by what that business could be.
And what are you going to be talking about? I think it's later, isn't it?
That's tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
And so we talk a little bit about the methodology that we teach companies, of the experimentation methodology being much more metrics and data driven, and that seems very straightforward. But like there's real specific things that you can do that any startup, particularly in the SaaS in the software business, that you can actually bring back. That you should be using, and surprisingly, very few people actually do.
I think it'll be
even in Silicon Valley, very few people follow that.
I think it'll be a very interesting session. So we've got a great audience. I know there's a lot of people with a lot of smarts, and I'm sure a lot of questions. So anybody with a question?
Yes, sir.
Marvin, this is not about investing at all, really.
Yeah, sure.
This is about, I went through the dot-com bubble and burst in London.
Yeah.
And I remember buying the first ad on Google for $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And then they went to a pay-per-click model.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, Yahoo had 70% of the market.
Yeah.
And so we went, and within 2 minutes you could generate an AdWords campaign and put it up, test it, work it out. And you went to Yahoo that had 70% of the market, and it would take like 2 weeks to get approval for those keywords. And it seemed to me that they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in one way, and that they just couldn't kind of compete with that speed that Google had.
Yeah.
What would you have done differently at Yahoo to try and change that dynamic at the time?
Interesting question. So, and this is actually very related to software in general, and so I'll explain. So I got together with a bunch of ex-Yahoo colleagues now, who are actually now at Snap, and we're just chatting about like, man, we had so many smart people working there. We had such a huge advantage. Like, how did we actually squander that? Right? And I literally should write a book about all the things that we did wrong, right? But one of the things that I think it was a structural and business model issue that we had at Yahoo. So, and I'm going somewhere with this, where I think Yahoo was always oriented towards selling toward large enterprise. And so what happens when you sell to large enterprise, the sales cycle tend to be very, very long. The processes are built around that. And also the order sizes are huge, but it takes a long time, and it's a complex sell. And versus, say, for example, Google or Facebook, they started with selling to SMBs, and as they're building a marketplace, the idea is about getting liquidity as fast as possible. So they built very simple product that anybody could use, and then over time, start adding features and sets to it to sort of like to disrupt from the bottom. And it's very, very hard to take a very complex product to simplify it, right? And so I actually think that was the reason we lost, because we were oriented around large enterprise, and they were oriented around SMBs in the beginning and scaling up. And I actually think if you look at most of the successful software businesses, almost all the successful startup businesses actually start with from bottoms up versus top down. It's just something I've just noticed in the last like 2 years.
Anybody else? Surely. Ralph.
Yeah, I was going to comment on your feet, but I will ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you look around the world, I mean, we've obviously seen the rise of China as a technology player.
Yep.
Anywhere else that sort of excites you in terms of some of the developing countries?
So I look at places from a supply and demand imbalance, right? And so if you ask me about what is exciting for me, right? Like obviously I still think the US is where a lot of the action is, right? But it's less so in Silicon Valley now and more in like Utah or like LA, Boston, more of like the next sort of like tier. You're starting to see a lot of activity there. So I'm very, very excited by that. Atlanta, really, really interesting stuff that's happening in Atlanta. I think across the globe. So here's my perspective. I think everything comes down to supply and demand, right? I think right now, Southeast Asia is overheated. I think there's too much money going to Southeast Asia for not enough like high quality founders and companies. I think there's too much money. I think Israel is an amazing market. There's too much money in Israel right now. And so you see a lot of European money, Russian money, Chinese money, American money, and it's the same base, right? Ultimately, it's a 9 million person sort of like, it is startup nation, amazing companies there, but it is over. And so where I go as an investor, I go to places where are unbalanced, where there's a lot of great founders, but I think there's less money or the money's not great. And so if I'm very honest, Canada, I'm very, very excited. I'm Canadian, but I'm spending a lot of time in Canada right now. I'm spending a lot of time in Europe overall. I think Europe is extremely exciting over the next like 5 years. I think Australia and New Zealand are extremely exciting. I'm not saying this like, I'm not here to make friends. I just think like I'm looking at this coldly. If I was to look at the next 5 years, I'll be spending a lot of time in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Europe overall, a lot of the secondary cities, it's not secondaries, but the next tier of cities in the US. I'm way more excited by that than Silicon Valley in general. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, actually very, very bullish about Latin America. I wouldn't do that many stuff. I wouldn't do much over the next 5 years in Latin America. I think China's overhyped, if I'm very honest, and I'm not a Trump supporter. I'll go on record saying that. I think it's too obvious that everyone thinks that China is going to be dominant. They have a lot of fundamental issues, demographic issues, environmental issues, non-performing loans issues. They have a lot of problems in general, and I don't think they are going to be, everyone seems to think that like, it's too obvious. It's too obvious. Everyone's very, very bearish on the US. I'm looking at this very, very coldly. The US is still one of the only sort of like balanced markets out there, like it or not. And it's still a very robust market. And also because it's such a ruthlessly capitalistic market, when the downturn comes, they'll fire a ton of people and the companies will be fine. A lot of the companies are still sitting on a lot of cash right now. And I think China has way more fundamental issues than people can actually see, looking at this coldly. But a lot of great innovations actually happening on the consumer side in general. And so I wouldn't count them out. Very, very interesting place, but they have a lot more problems than people see.
Question behind you first.
Yeah,
Yep.
I just had a question. So this is more from a founder perspective and an ecosystem
Sure.
development perspective.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to the space that 500 startups in, so accelerator space. So this is more about outcomes, measuring success. So in your opinion, so you could either measure success as returns generated, or you could, there could be another measure of success, which is number of companies graduated.
Sure.
So that's the first part of the question. The next part of the question is, if I was to take the perspective of a founder, and if I go to the States and I see lots of good accelerators, so obviously measure of success here, the easiest measure of success is like if I want to choose between different incubators, alignment's an obvious thing. Whichever incubator is more aligned, I would assume would be more successful. And so in the US, most incubators are aligned. Most of them have really good people.
That's not true.
No?
That's not true.
So what is the truth? Like what's your view on
So my view on how you pick an accelerator is sort of how you pick a college, right? It's what am I trying to learn? What's my biggest problem? And who is best equipped to sort of help me there, right? So for example, if you are looking at, say, like I'll give you an example, like there's one program called NFX, and they're run by friends of mine. They're awesome, and all they do is marketplace businesses. Nobody knows marketplace businesses better than them, honestly. And I've sent companies where talk to me, and I'm just like, super honest, I can help you. I've done a bunch of marketplaces, but these guys like James and Peter Flint, like these guys are amazing. Like they're really, really good. Or there's another one which is like the Unusual Academy, and it's like run by the guy who sold App Dynamics for like $3 billion, right? And by Andy Johns, who's like one of the best consumer guys around. I'm like, they're really awesome too. And so I think, or if, for example, if it's a prestige thing or it's a fundraising thing, Y Combinator is pretty awesome there, right? For us, we're sales and marketing. Like if you have a sales and marketing issue, we are damn good in that area, right? Like the growth side. So really understanding what your biggest challenge is, and can this program help you get there and fix that?
So how would you measure your success?
You mean as a founder or as
an accelerator? How do you
I mean, there's a lot of metrics you look at, right? One immediate one is NPS scores, right? Like, do the companies get value? Another one is fundraising, which I don't think is a great measure, but it's like, it is some measure. It's like the quality of the investors, how many the companies actually raise, how much they raise. Another metric is have they grown their business, right? Like a lot of my businesses like are able to get a ton of customers during the program and after the program, right? And build out the sales process. So it's a combination of all these things. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
I was going to say, so you touched upon environmental issues in China, sort of bearing in mind how things are looking now around the world, and the sort of myriad, pretty terrifying ecological indicators that we have on multiple fronts. What is your opinion on sort of some of the areas that potentially are tackling that? So for example, I'm thinking lab grown meats and milks, that area is...
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, that area has been, like, for example, the food tech area has been very interesting for the last 2 years, and there's a lot of money going to it there because there's a lot of awareness of what a big issue it is, right? And from a health perspective too, and from an environmental perspective, like that's a very interesting area for sure.
You active in that space?
I don't know that area because it's really more of a biotech thing, but I do recognize sort of the value of it, and I have a lot of friends who are investing in that area, so it is an interesting area. It just, I don't have expertise, so I think as an investor you have to have some level of awareness, of self-awareness of like, I know this, of what is my center of excellence and like core competence, and what do I not know, right? And so I try to keep a view of that. But fascinating area. Like biotech is really interesting. So I've been taking classes and stuff, but just gotta take classes, I should not invest, I just don't get it. It's a very different methodology and thinking around investing in that area.
So there's no twitching hands at the moment, so let me... Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
You mentioned New Zealand's an emerging market, New Zealand, Australia, emerging market. From the lessons that you've learned over the last wee while, as you watch the tech industry explode in America, what are the things that we need to do right now to be able to support the growth of startups and maturity of investment?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just like, get educated, like how to do deals, like don't fuck up the cap tables. I see so many fucked up cap tables coming out of this country. Like I see these really awesome companies.
What constitutes a fuck up?
Well, so like angels taking too much in the beginning, and also understanding what, like, I'm like, yeah, great, you're a great business person, a great entrepreneur in, like, you know, like for example, a banker, right? Or in property, like that does, and so great, this is a prop tech company, maybe you might have some expertise, but I'm like, this is a software SaaS business, like you don't know anything. And so stop giving stupid advice that hurts a company in general, right? Like know what your area of expertise is. Like it's like me giving advice on like, oh, you should use this programming language. I'm like, I have no idea. Like that, I'm literally like I ask me about fundraising, ask me about sales and marketing, ask me about whatever, like go to market stuff, but don't ask me about like what programming language you should use or, you know, whatever, right? Like understand what your sort of like core expertise is and where you give advice. Just a lot of the advice I hear, like I talk to companies and they're like, what? Your investor told you to do this? That's stupid. Like just really stupid. And like they're not qualified to give you this advice, right? And because you're like and this is also the problem with there is and I see this a lot, right? It's like, I have money, been super successful, so like I know everything. And you're like, no, you don't know jack shit. Tech is a completely different area. So have the humility to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, right? And that's why I lost a bunch of my money. I'm like, yeah, I know this stuff. I'm like, no, I didn't know. I didn't know.
Anything else that the startups need that you've seen work really well in the ecosystem that you're working in? We need, from what you know about New Zealand.
Yeah, don't fuck up the cap tables. I think that what's good about a lot of the US founders, particularly value founders, is that they're not afraid of pushing back and questioning. I think a lot of founders mindlessly take the advice that's given. And I'm like, you need to be willing to push back on ask why, right?
Yeah. I mean, when we run our advice sessions, we do it on a weekly basis, we like to see them coachable but smart, so that you want them to question the questions that we ask and be smart about it, not just follow it.
Yeah, not just, it's kind of like the joke one of my professors says, the problem with some students is that they believe the last book they read, right? And so it's just like you kind of...
That's why you don't read them.
Yeah, or you read a bunch of books, right?
Okay, so it's kind of self-belief, right? You've got to install that self-belief in those founders to be able to
I think it's
ask
just
why.
asking the question and also really going and looking in the background, are you qualified to give advice in this area, right? It's just like I said, it's like me giving advice on UX. I'm like, I don't know anything about UX, but I think I give pretty good advice on sales and marketing, right? Because I've done it before, right? And so it's just it really is what you are qualified to sort of give advice on. And I think a lot of times it's not necessarily, I think for mentors or advisors where it's usually from good intentions. It's not like I'm trying to see this founder or whatever, but it's just also being very honest. It's just a lot of times when a founder asks me for advice and I'm like, yeah, okay, I don't know. I'm just very open about be open with your ignorance. I have no idea. But one of the things I also try to do where I try not to be too prescriptive, where I'm just here's how I would think about it. Here are the different ways you should think about it, and you at the end of the day need to go and make a decision, right? And also understand as an angel investor, understand that, or not, it's actually not your company, all right? You just giving out money, all right? Money is a commodity. And so ultimately your job, and this is something it took me a while to sort of get used to as an ex-operator, where I remember sitting there going yeah, it's I'm gonna run this company. And no, actually your job is to give advice and they can choose to take it or not. And you have to understand that. And I think that this is what I see with a lot of, this isn't just in New Zealand or Australia and Canada, I see this everywhere, right? A lot of times the investor puts money in and they start trying to run it. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You don't know anything about this business. I see that a lot. And I'm like, great, you're great at building a bunch of factories. What do you know about building software?
The way I like to put it is, we don't invest to buy ourselves a job.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Investment chance, is there anything that you see that has become market standard that irks you, or that if given the opportunity you would reset and just do things differently?
I think all tools that I see right now are being abused, right? So for example, I'm a big fan of convertible notes. Convertible notes, safe, they make sense. But the problem right now is just, I think unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand. I literally see companies raising multitudes, $2 million on a safe, then another $2 million, another $2 million, and it starts to stack. They have to convert eventually, and so they don't understand what the type of dilution that's actually going to have on them. And so I think there's a lot of ignorance right now of what those things are. I think the valuations have actually creeped up in the US a lot, probably because there's an imbalance of money and good founders in general. That's happened in Southeast Asia too. That happened in China a couple of years ago. And so I see crazy high valuations. And so what I hammer into my companies is you want to be market standard. You don't want to be too high because and so this is what's interesting is I find a lot of the value investors care too much about dilution, care too much about I got this great, crazy high valuation, I'm awesome. But I'm yeah, but you have to sort of earn your way into that, right? And grow into that. That's not necessarily good, right? And so there is such thing as too high, because what happens is if it's so crazy high, it's gonna be very hard for you to raise the next one if you don't hit those milestones that you say you're gonna do. I think being too low is really bad because of the crazy dilution you will end up getting. And that's really bad too. And so I don't know if there's anything. I think the convertible notes, for a lot of founders, they need to understand that it will eventually need to convert. And so understand what is market standard and trying to raise at a valuation that makes sense for both sides, right? And I met this really interesting company yesterday, and I'm not gonna tell you the name, but I looked at understanding sort of how much they raised and the cap table. It's just yeah, I don't think any institutional is going to come in. Cap table's kind of messed up. Investors took too much too early. And if I'm very honest, I don't think that they were very capital efficient with the amount that they raised for where they're at right now. Very surprised. And I'm seeing a lot of that. Some of my companies have raised like several $1 million, like many, many millions of dollars. And I'm like, yeah, you're never going to raise your A because like you've raised this amount, but like your traction level's here when you should be here. They can't raise. So we look at that now too.
Generally, it's sounding like you've got a few concerns about the angel approach, as opposed to, say, for example, bootstrapping, acceleration, and then seed rounds. Is that a reasonable takeaway from what you're saying? Because you're talking about angels maybe having to own opinion themselves, possibly think they can do more than just provide money. But with the acceleration and with the seed, it feels like it's a little bit more of a controlled process.
Okay, so here's my take in general, right? Like there are a lot of companies right now in Silicon Valley that are not going through acceleration, that may not even take seed. They're mainly raising from angels. And I think there's a big difference of the angel investors in Silicon Valley. A lot of them are ex-founders, a lot of them are operators, so they actually legitimately are very, very helpful. And I think that's a big difference. Like I have companies I've raised almost $2 million all from angels only, or super angels, right? So-called super angels. And they're very helpful. Like I actually think there's a huge difference of the angel community, because think about this, right? Like it is highly competitive in the Valley to get into companies, whether as a VC or as an early stage seed investor or as an angel investor. And the reality is that it's a big place, but it's a small place. Your reputation carries you. If you have a reputation of screwing over founders, you don't get into deals later on. And we are very, very active like over time. And this goes both ways, both founders, bad behavior for founders as well as bad behavior for investors. You kind of find out very, very quickly who they are, and they eventually all get pushed out of the market. And that has happened over the last 20 years I've lived there. So you see that. And that will happen here too. That has happened in Europe now. Like a lot of those really bad, I sat on a board with this really crap angel investor. I can tell you, through that bad behavior, a lot of people heard, and he used to be a major player, less of a player now. Rightfully, horrible human being. He will never get into any deals that I get into. And I will be very active about hurting him in the future if I can. Because that behavior is not tolerated. You killed that company. Yeah. Yes?
Equity crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got a view on because I take up Rudy's comment, and I think we don't have angel groups here. We have organised crowdfunding groups.
I mean, they're basically clubs of high net worth individuals, right? Usually boys club. We have that in Canada too. They're all useless. It's a great opportunity to get together, talk deals, and pretend that you're doing business, right? But it's fine, nothing wrong with that. But just, like don't wreck startup founders, right? Like don't wreck their businesses. Do no harm, right? It's like the doctors, the Hippocratic oath, do no harm.
So you got a view on equity crowdfunding and what role it might play?
I think it's still very early. I worry about equity crowdfunding because I think it'll eventually become bigger, but right now I just have a lot of questions on it. It's just the blind leading the blind, right? And so I worry about like grandmas putting their money into stuff and losing their money, right? Like I just have questions on it. I think it's a very interesting, because it is a problem, right? Like the only people in angel invest right now that are like high net worth individuals, like this is another really interesting asset class that I think that people should be able to get their hands into, right? Like their hands on. But I also think it requires a very specific skill set and education level. And I don't mean like school education, just like you need to sort of know what you're doing. It's really easy to lose your money. And so I do worry with some of the crowdfunding or just the controls and things there. It's still early days, but I'm hopeful that in the long run that might actually become a new source for startups. But boy, we're a long ways away from that.
You see a lot of deals from outside the US.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for startup founders that say, look, it's a tackle in the US market, sales market, hiring? Is there kind of traits that you see in successful companies in this space?
You just got to go, like, I think any foreign founder, if you're planning on cracking the US or cracking China, you just got to show up, relocate yourself and your family over there and just like go all in. And I see too many people hedging. Startups is all about commitment, right? And so you got to go all in. be prepared to spend like a year or two going and learning about the market and just going selling and not outsourcing that. Gotta do it yourself. Yes, sir.
Given that we've sort of been in the longest expansion period since 2009 that we've had, and we've been printing money,
Sure.
and yields are way down in all asset classes,
Yeah.
and so a lot of it's started to flow into this space.
Yes.
And we have Trump and his trade war, and we have some political instability. Are you kind of preparing yourself for the downturn in terms of helping these companies raise in anticipation of that, or do you have a view on that? Or
I think, and I say this because I'm probably going to suffer. I'm very liquid, to be frank, and so I think it's going to be painful. But I think this type of pain is actually helpful for ecosystems, for economies as well too. It weeds out the mercenaries, it weeds out the weak. And I actually think that there's a lot of bad behavior right now, and that only happens when there's a big influx of money in general. And so I think as an investor, I'm very excited by recessions because it's a great time to invest. The best founders show up, right? So for example, I tend to look at industries and trends that tend to be hyped up like 2-3 years earlier, because what happens is when things get hyped up, all the mercenaries and the quick buck money show up. But what happens is when it's these spaces or sectors or geographies are very unsexy, you see the real builders actually show up. And so, or the mission-minded people show up, and those are the people I invest in. And so personally, as an investor, I'm very excited by that. And for me, I've always talked about, like, I don't care how much you raise. I care about, are you solving a real problem? Are you really mission oriented? Are you building a business model that works? Do you have unit economics that work? And that will work in a recession, that will work during expansion times. It's about getting the fundamentals right. And unfortunately, a lot of investors right now have never seen the downturn. They've only invested in a upturn, right? And I think it's a very different skill set. We'll see. I think a lot of those folks, a lot of these investors, a lot of VC funds, a lot of angel investors, a lot of startup founders are going to get carted out in the next downturn. And that may not be a bad thing.
Okay. A supplementary question. How do you think the next downturn is going to affect the crypto blockchain space?
I'm seeing interesting stuff happening in the crypto space right now, and you're seeing real use cases that seem to make sense now. But right now, we're still in the building phase of infrastructure and building phase of crypto. So I think I'm long-term bullish on crypto. I think I'm talking about 10-year long-term bullish. I think the next 5 years is still a lot of work that still needs to be done. So I'm personally very careful about the crypto investment side. But I do think there's something there, personally.
Will Uber ever be profitable?
So that is the $100 billion question, right? So if you look at Uber, on date, it's a local-to-local marketplace. And so if you look at certain regions and certain cities, they're actually incredibly profitable. If you look at it, the issue is actually in some of they're in a lot of places, and they sort of like go big or go home. That's kind of what they did. But the problem is that marketplace businesses are winner-take-all businesses, and there's competition in almost every single market that they're in. And so I worry about their margin, and so I have questions on that. I really question. I think Uber would have made sense as a $20 billion business. I'm not sure it made sense as a $70 or $80 billion business. And so it's a valuation thing, not a business model issue. Does that make sense?
So, as an investor, which sectors that you want to go into, and which sectors that you want to avoid?
I always get a question from investors from MBAs. And so this is how I would answer it, and this is how I answered. I think if you're an early stage investor overall, you are investing in micro and you're not investing in macro. And let me explain this, all right? I think if you are investing in hot trends, you are not going to do very well. And so I try to invest in, like, here's the thing, my best investments were ones that were really, and I didn't know this back then, but now I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah. And so, for example, I invest in Jeff Bezos said this, and this is why they're crushing it. It's like, we are prepared to be misunderstood longer than most people are willing to do. And so, for example, as an early stage investor, I think you're investing in hot spaces. Like everyone's like, oh, we're doing AI now. I'm like, you're too late. I think you have to invest in stuff, like all my best investments are stuff that my partners like, why the fuck are you doing this deal? This makes no sense to me. And so no conflict and no interest. And so I'm a big believer of consensus investment, and consensus investing is a weakness. And you have to be able to have your own point of view and perspective on where the world is going and your own perspective on deals. And so when so for example, when my colleagues and I, my team, I run the investment team for the Accelerator, when we talk and everybody agrees on this company, whether everyone hates it or everyone loves it, I really question. I think I'm like, what are we missing here? I want to understand what we're missing here. I like conflict. When you have the strong debates at the table, my best investments are always ones that you debate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I'm not begging on you, but I think it's very easy to invest based on trends like, oh, IoT is hot or crypto is hot. But I think when it's widely recognized, and like I said, it shouldn't be that easy, all right? And this is why the best investors, like folks I admire a lot, Peter Thiel and all his acolytes, the guys at 8VC, at Founders Fund, at, what's the other fund? Jeffrey Lewis, he runs like Bedrock Capital, like all these guys, like their deals are very hard to understand. You're like, I don't get this, but they're almost always right because they're so far ahead of the curve and they're high conviction investors. The guys that Initialize too, high conviction investors. They don't care what other investors. The worst thing you can do as an investor is ask, the worst question might be, who else is in this deal? You're a shit investor if you're asking that. You're basing you're basing investment based on who else is investing in this deal, you're gonna lose money. You're gonna lose money. And I feel very strongly about that.
There's an exception to that in my angel club, sorry.
Whatever, but I will put my IRR against any of your IRR any day of the week. I'll crush you.
I think maybe it would be qualified, but that's the only thing you look at.
Yeah, for sure.
Going
Yeah,
along,
for
right?
sure.
No, you've asked so many questions.
Just interested, you mentioned APC. What is it about APC?
I think they're they're contrarian investors. They are non-consensus investors, right? They don't care what the trends are in the valley of like AI, this or whatever. Like their very first principles of like, what's the problem? Does this thing actually make sense? They don't care. They're just going to go in and take the whole round, right? Like they're non-consensus investors. And I actually think the best investors are non-consensus. Just my opinion.
Indeed.
Given what you know about New Zealand, what spaces do you think New Zealand can excel in?
I think SaaS is interesting. There's starting to be some interesting SaaS related companies. I think ag tech potentially, right? Because this is a strong area. I think FMCG as well too. Your products are amazing. I think what sucks right now is your branding and your packaging. And that's fixable.
How about space industry?
Yeah, also, totally. Very well positioned. Very well positioned.
What sucks about the packaging and the branding? Seriously.
No, my take is that this is why Americans are great at sales and great at marketing. They have no shame, and I think you can lose a little bit of humility. It's a Canadian thing too. As you can tell, I've kind of lost a lot of the things, right? But I actually think there's a big difference. I think humility hurts you sometimes if you're trying to get good at sales and marketing, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, just like it's not bragging if you can back it up with numbers.
So you just said SaaS. One of my questions that I often get is, can a SaaS business also have service revenue, or is that a distraction?
Yes, absolutely. I think in early stage, services business is actually how you learn about the customer base, how you, particularly for enterprise in general, is actually how you learn. You get paid to actually build out the product that your customer actually wants, and it's a great way to sort of help bootstrap in the beginning. And so I'm a huge fan in general service in the early days, right? And over time, as the product actually becomes sort of like, it should become a bigger component of the revenue sort of like mix.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on competition versus differentiation?
I mean, everything has competition now, right? And so I think differentiation is as a VC fund, competition as an individual employee, competition as a firm, as a company, whatever, as a restaurant. Like, differentiation is the most important thing right now. So you need to understand what you are 10x better than anybody else. How you are 10x better than your competition. Easier said than done. That's really hard.
Challenge in New Zealand is that it's such a small market. The early experience for a lot of the founders doesn't give them enough focus to actually say, here is a niche, here is where we can differentiate. But yeah, I agree, it's really important.
I think it's like everything's a double-edged blade, right? And so, like, think about Estonia. It's a tiny, tiny country. They're just crushing it. I mean, you look at how many awesome companies that come out of Estonia, because they're like, great, I do this business for Estonia, but it's actually like million and a half people. Like, no, we have to think regional and think globally from day one. That's an advantage. I actually think that's an advantage, and that's something that New Zealand does have. Like, and also just like, I just think I look at the quality level of the products in general, very high. Not just FMCG, CPG, but also consumer packaged goods, but also like tech, like good products coming out of here. Good tinkers.
Indeed.
Terry, you talked earlier on about one of the challenges that you see is that people are raising a too high valuation for the traction, so the next round is going to be really difficult, right? Are you able to illuminate that a little bit more? Give us some kind of examples about what sort of traction you're looking for at seed or Series A.
So for example, I have a whole bunch of like pre-launch companies, even though the founding team is really strong, like raising at like 15 mil caps. That seems insane to me, right? Like, yes, you have some, like, I think it's a little bit different, right? So there's variables you look at. It's like, what does the industry look like? Do they have some very differentiated view there? Is there a super competitive landscape, right? Then the background of the founders, like if they sold their last company for like several $100 million, you're like, okay, I'll make the bet, right? Like maybe that's worth it. But if they've never done this before and you're looking at like 15 mil caps or 20 mil, you're like, that does not compute, right? And it's usually not a revenue multiple. It's just like, I think it's just understanding. So like 10,000 MRR, you're like, okay, that's something. Like there's something, that was, I think Sam's business from Melodics was like, I think they were like 13K MRR. And he is so cocky coming in. It's like, oh, like, I'm doing great. And I'm like, no, that's nothing, dude. Like, it's nothing. And so just like understanding sort of like for the spaces, and I think it's a data sample set, right? So I speak with confidence on a lot of stuff because our data sample set's very large, right? And it's global. So we just look at so many deals, talk to so many founders. And so through that, you get to have a sense of what is market rate, or what is market standard of just like, oh, that seems like very high, or like, well, that seems really, really low. And I would say I aspire for every meeting I have with the founder, they should walk away with something that's somewhat actionable, or some market intelligence where they go, I'm raising this, and I'm like, for what you're trying to do, might be raising too much, or maybe not raising enough, or you're raising like, your valuation seems kind of high, right? Like, I think it should be this, just based on what I see, take it for what it is, it's a data point, right? But they should be able to walk away going like, okay, that wasn't a total waste of my time. Which is like, it's a low bar, but at the same time, I'm like, I think you have to think about at the end of the day, like they're your customer, right? Like whether you invest in them or not, they're your customer. And sometimes I'm very direct about stuff, as you can probably tell.
No, you hide it very well.
Yeah, yeah. But at the end of the day, like this is a service business. So I think even if I don't invest, I need to have added some level of value to them.
And what's the diligence you run over companies versus if they come through the accelerator versus not? I mean, they're two different processes, right?
Yeah, in general. So I would say I leverage my team a lot more. We discuss the deals a lot more with my team because it's almost like training as well too for them. Versus say, for example, doing the direct deals, I try to ask my network as well too on getting their perspectives on stuff. But ultimately, I still have to make the final decision, right? But I probably go run around and try to find more data and stuff on them. I do. Like in both situations, I try to do sort of like background checks, not so background checks per se, but sort of like more on like reference checking.
That cuts out half the people on this room. It's good. Okay, cheers, mate.
Some of your memorable misses, companies you wish you invested in and didn't?
I mean, I've said this publicly. I think if you ask most investors and they're honest, which they are not, their anti-portfolio usually is better than their real portfolio. You just miss a lot of deals, right? So I missed this one company called Pebble Post. I just couldn't get my act together quickly enough, and I was able to potentially could have gotten in at and I knew them. I know the space really, really well, and love the guys, and it just made a lot of sense. And I could have gotten in at like 5 mil valuation, and now they're worth like $500 million now. So it's just like shit. Like, yeah, but love that business.
You've just given me a wonderful idea. I think we're going to have a sidecar fund and an anti-fund.
Yeah, so everyone, sidecar fund goes into anything you reject.
Well, the anti-fund will do. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean it's hard, right? Like here's what I say in general. I've heard investors say this, and or at least some investor friends have said this. And one of the things they say is just like, look, like lifestyle wise, like look, being an investor is amazing. Being a great investor is really hard. This is a very, very hard game to be on top because there's new competition all the time. And like I said, the rules of just like doing startups and investing like 10 years ago have changed. Even when I started doing this professionally 5.5 years ago, it's just a completely different environment right now. And so you're always learning. And I actually think like this is a game where you just can't get complacent. And so my competition is global, right? And so like you are always learning new things. You know, the rules that you learn, you almost have to throw out sometimes where like lessons I learned from 5-6 years ago. Some of them still hold, some of them don't hold anymore. So just understanding like it's a continual competition. And your race is actually against yourself, right, to get better, right? And so I saw this this is a documentary about, I watch a lot of documentaries. It's a documentary about like the sports greats like Wayne Gretzky and Serena Williams and Michael Jordan. And one of the things which I think this is not just sports people, but like business people, whatever, right? Like academics, it's just like the best ones, they have a rage to master, right? They have something to prove to them and in the outside world, but also just this deep interest in actually getting really good at this. And I actually think to be a great investor, and I've been very, very fortunate to be mentored by some amazing, like some of the top 20 Forbes Midas list VCs. I was very, very lucky, and just like they had that rage to master. Just like they're going to work on this for the rest of their lives to get good at this. And so this is a continual game. And I think the problem with a lot of angels is that they come in, they dabble. I don't think you can get good at this, at whatever you choose to do. It's a hobby. It's not, and it's I don't know. I just think it depends on what you're doing this for. You're doing it for fun, great. Do no harm, learn a bunch of stuff. But I actually think it's very, very hard to get good at this if you're just dabbling. It's very hard to get good at anything if you're just dabbling. And I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Right? And I'm your competition. Yes?
What does portfolio management look like for such a...
Oh my God, nightmare. Nightmare. It's really, really hard. I mean, every day I dread email because it's like, they only ping you when stuff goes wrong, right? They don't ping you with great news. And so, but I don't mind it. I mean, that's the job, right? And portfolio management is a challenge. Every VC fund has this challenge. And us particularly because we have such a big portfolio. But it's one of those things where just you got to do it. If you like puzzles, it's an incredible thing to do. I like puzzles.
Hey, thanks very much, guys, and thank you, Marvin. Look, I'm conscious that it's 3 p.m. and some of you may have commitments, including our cameraman.